Hey everybody, ASMR FTB here, back with another, well, actually this is the first Final Fantasy VII Remake video I'm going to be making, and it's actually going to be a review of Final Fantasy VII Remake, the game. I originally tried to do like a video essay about this, but I just don't think I'm a video. I just don't think I'm a video essay. I was going to say I'm not a video game guy. I'm not a video essay guy. I tried to like pre-record. I have a whole script written, and then when I read it back and after listening to it, I don't know. It doesn't sound authentic. It doesn't sound me. I think I come across a lot better in this more stream of consciousness type of video, type of articulation of my thoughts and feelings. So I do have the script up in front of me, but I'm using it mainly just as notes. It's just kind of the main points I wanted to get across. So without further ado, we're going to be discussing Final Fantasy VII Remake, which was released a while ago. According to my notes here. Oh, I didn't even put down what date it was released. I believe it was released in April of 2020. So, roughly 4 years ago. And I'm doing this review in preparation for the release of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which will be releasing in a matter of hours. It's 9:32 p.m. at the time of recording. At midnight tonight on February 28th, although at midnight it'll be the 29th, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will come out. The reason I'm making this review of Remake so close to the sequel is because in preparation for playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I decided to go back and play Final Fantasy VII Remake to kind of get a feeling of the games back to back and kind of re-experience the story, so that I kind of go into its sequel with fresh eyes, with with fresh knowledge of what had been happening, what happened. You know the deal. And it was kind of during my replay that I kind of started noticing some glaring issues with the game. And that's not to say that the game is bad. To be clear and to start, I wanted to make it very clear, I love Final Fantasy VII Remake. I think it's a good game. I don't think it's great. I think there's a lot that could have been improved. And I think there's a lot, that can be improved upon in Rebirth, and I hope they do. We won't, I might make a closing statement about that, but overall, there were just a few things that stuck out to me that I want to talk about. But to be clear, my criticisms, it might sound like I'm pretty harsh on the game. It's just harsh criticism on these few, salient points. I don't know if salient is the right word, but on these few specific points. There are a few specific points about the game, within the game, that I kind of want to discuss, because I think this game is a little overrated. It is fantastic, it is really good, but I think people saw it through the lenses of nostalgia goggles. So when they got to see these characters in this setting represented in modern graphical fidelity, they overlooked some of the glaring issues that I want to talk about today. They overlooked some of the things that really are either outdated or just provide the player with a pretty negative experience, to be honest. And there's a pretty significant amount of these instances within the game. Right now, the game stands at an 87 Metascore with an 8.1 user score. I think that's a little conflated or inflated. I want to say inflated, I think is the right word. It's a little inflated, and I think it's because of the nostalgia factor. I think people overestimate how good this game was. So, I'll kind of get into my determination of where this game stands on an out of 10, scoring model. I think an 87 or an 81 is too high. Not significantly higher, but I think that score is a little inflated because of people's love for its source material. So they overlooked some of the pretty big issues, pretty big drawbacks that this game has within it. I mean, I think a lot of it stems from the fact that they took the first 5 hours of the original Final Fantasy game. You know, you're just playing the Midgar section. Once the party leaves Midgar, that's when the game ends. And how do you take 5 hours of gameplay that feels really well, paced in general? There are some moments where the first 5 hours of Final Fantasy VII, the original, drag, but for the most part, it's it's a pretty well paced 5 hours. How do you take that 5 hours that's well paced, well structured for the most part, and expand that into 30 hours of gameplay or more, depending on your level of difficulty and how much you plan on completing. So overall completionism, if that's even a word. But overall, how much you plan to complete, right? Like you could play Final Fantasy VII for, I think between both playthroughs I have like 60 hours, and I think my most recent playthrough, the one I'm doing right before Rebirth, the one I just did, is the longest playthrough I did, because I went back and actually tried to get trophies in the trophy select and stuff like that. And another point that I want to kind of make is, when I beat the game, when I beat Final Fantasy VII Remake the first time, I didn't really go back and revisit a lot of things. I loved the game, but when I thought about replaying stuff, it felt arduous, and there's a reason for that, because there are a lot of parts of this game that are tedious and laborious, and I think the developers made some pretty odd choices. So that in and of itself says something. There are very, if you enjoyed a game, or if a game is good, pretty much when you beat it, you want to go back and re-experience some of the things that you experienced because you enjoyed it, because you liked it. And with this game, once I beat it, I was just kind of done. And that's the sign of a game that might not be as good as I thought it was. I was like, oh, it's great, but I'm not going to go back and replay, try to trophy hunt or whatever. And I think that says something. So yeah, kind of one of the main issues I think is pacing. They took 5 hours of well-paced, well-structured gameplay from the original, and they tried to stretch it out into over 30 hours of gameplay, and I don't think that they succeeded. I think there are a lot of instances where you can see that the developers made deliberate choices to basically just extend the player's time within the game. There are so many instances where, and some of it is for a technical standpoint. There are a lot of instances in the game. There are a lot of parts of the game where, the characters have to squeeze between, thin sections of a wall or in a train car, and they kind of do that little sidle where they go on their side and they kind of shift, sidle forwards, side face. And they just kind of move slowly, and you just have to hold the left stick forward and to get them through it, type of thing. If you're understanding me, hopefully I'll edit the video so that you can kind of see what I'm talking about as we go along. So like, some of those could be like disguised loading screens. So some of it could be a technical aspect. But there's a whole section in chapter 16 that illustrates really what I'm trying to talk about. When you're playing as Tifa and she falls off the chandelier things, and then you have to monkey bar your way. Like the monkey bar part, it was just brutal. Like it just felt like a scenario where the developer just wanted to tack on here. Here we can tack on 10 minutes with this whole Tifa on the chandeliers and then monkey barring her way over to this and that and the whatever. And then there were so many like side quests that just felt like bulk. It just felt like add-on nothing. There were so many fetch questy, do nothing, add nothing, no value add. Just like here's XP and some, and a mega potion or something, and it just didn't feel. There was heart in a lot of it. It felt like there was just tacked on afterthoughts, and that's not something that should have been in this game. With the amount of time that this game was worked on, I think that, so, and I'll kind of give the game a counterpoint. the entire side quest with Jesse, and although I guess it's not really a side quest because it gets its own full story chapter, so it is kind of part of the main story, but we get this whole new expansion into Jesse and her background and her motivations. And I thought that was wonderful. I thought that Square Enix did a really great job showing us more of Jesse, showing us, fleshing out her story. I thought that was beautiful and wonderful and awesome. And it just made me question, on a lot of these stupid side quests that I was doing. And, I was doing these stupid side quests and I was asking myself, why am I spending time doing this, this monotonous, tedious stuff? I just wish that they spent more time developing stories like they did for Jesse for the other characters, rather than adding on this no value add bulk. If half the quests in, what is it, chapter 9 or whatever, if some of the quests could have been cut out, all the fetch questy stuff, like why do I have to go find these scared chocobos to get the chocobo fast travel thing working? Just have it work from the get-go. Save that time and add it back into some sort of value add. Give me a lengthy explorative side quest with Biggs and Wedge. Let me explore those characters. It doesn't have to be exactly like Jesse's. It doesn't have to be as in-depth and as explorative as that side quest or main quest chapter was. But let me have something similar to that with Biggs and with Wedge. Or some of the other, you introduce these new characters. Marl, I think, the apartment owner with, in Sector 7, you introduce this character and you don't really give them, why was she introduced? You never really give her room to breathe. We get a little bit of attitude, she shows us a little bit of her personality, and I loved that, but why introduce these characters if you're not going to let them breathe, if you're not going to let me explore, their backstories, and stuff. It upon replaying the game, it really made me reflect on the time wasted doing some of these monotonous, tiresome side quests and just random fat added onto the game. And I think it could have been better utilized with more fleshed out stories. And I think the developers certainly had time to kind of do that with some of the other characters. But unfortunately, that's not what ended up happening. Another thing, kind of another, add-on bulk area was like the train graveyard. So, the party learns that Shinra is going to be dropping the Sector 7 plate on the Sector 7 slums. So killing, potentially tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, depending on, I think, what's his name? Reeve says that there's 50,000 people on the plate, so presumably there's probably roughly about the same amount or more under. So maybe, or maybe he was saying total, I don't know. But tens to hundreds of thousands of people could die when this happens. So the party discovers this, and it's a race back to Sector 7 to save the slums, to save the people, in the slums and on the plate for Sector 7. And, Don Corneo sends you to the sewers, and the sewers are tedious and kind of a linear bore fest of just, click this button, lower water, click this button, raise water, click this button, raise gate, which lowers water, go over, click this button that makes this bridge, this clogged bridge unclogged, and then you can walk over the, it's just like all this kind of boring, in between you're fighting enemies, so like there is stuff to keep your attention, but it just kind of feels sluggish, and not really thought out. Like you're just kind of going through the motions when you're down in the sewers, and then once you get out of the sewers, you're like, okay, train graveyard, and then I'm right, here, we made it topside, get through the train graveyard, and then we'll go save Sector 7. And that sense of urgency, you have that, and it kind of gets a little bogged down when you're in the sewers, and then you get out of the sewers and you're hoping, all right, like you're reinvigorated, we made it out, now we'll get back fast and move the story forward, and then you just go through another, like, the train graveyard, depending on difficulty and how much you want to complete, is like an hour and a half probably it's definitely not 2 hours, but there's like two boss fights that you fit two bosses. Like the original Train Graveyard was like 5 or 10 minutes, no bosses. You just had to get through, some small puzzles, and then you got through. And this one they stretched it out to like an hour of two bosses and getting sidetracked by these little mischievous ghosts and stuff, and the story that the ghosts have, it's all kids that were, their souls were stuck there by some dark Eligor. Like, none of that matters. Eligor and the kids' souls being stuck in this train graveyard, none of it mattered. And they, like, shoehorn Marlene in, which meant nothing. Like, her soul wasn't stuck there. It was just kind of like a reminder that Marlene exists for the players. So, like, but, like, we know what's at stake, that Sector 7 is going to be destroyed. So, like, what, like, I don't know. That just kind of confused me, that Marlene just kind of, like, shows up there. I don't know. It was just kind of frustrating to get topside, and, you have that sense of urgency that's kind of renewed once you get, you know that there's something at stake. A lot is at stake, hundreds of lives at stake. You go down to the sewers. You want to rush through the sewers, but you kind of, I lost a little bit of interest in the sewers because it just felt rinse, repeat, boring. But anyway, you get topside. You get that feeling of urgency again. Want to go save the day, and then it's just like, bleh. It was just really disappointing. And, like, the boss fights had really frustrating fate. Like, when Eligor goes up in the air, and then you just have to focus on being Aerith to shoot him, and then you can't use magic. So, it was just like, I wanted to go. I had that feeling of urgency, and then to be just slammed in the face with this, like, you're just being blockaded and slowed to a snail's pace. When you have that, it's just, it's just like in testing, how was it not seen that, like, this was a pacing issue, right? Like, I don't know. So I think that's kind of my point. I feel like there was time tacked on to all these extraneous parts of the game that didn't need extra exploration. The train graveyard, it was called the train graveyard, and there were ghosts in it. I don't, maybe they did want to have some sort of story in it in the original, but, like, the pacing wise, you get out of the sewers and you race back to Sector 7, like, it just felt better in the original. It's like the minimal polygon predecessor of Final Fantasy Remake somehow does pacing better. Like, you had an opportunity here to really figure this out, and I don't know, it just felt like they just tacked on things just to make you spend more time playing, which isn't the right mentality. That's not the right approach to game design, in my opinion. I'm not a game designer. I'm just an idiot from Connecticut, so don't listen to me, but it's just my opinion. So I thought that the combat overall was a little clunky. I mean, I'll give them some credit. Like, there are times when you're in combat in Final Fantasy VII Remake, and it's awesome. You set it up perfectly so that you stagger a boss right at the moment that you have a summon leaving the battlefield, so it delivers, like, its final blow, big hit, dealing massive damage, and at the same time you use your favorite, like, weapon ability, or you use your limit break, and you deal, like, massive amount of damage to a boss, and it just, you feel like you've created this awesome moment, and you, like, achieved something. But it just felt like those moments were really few and far between. And it felt like orchestrating that sort of orchestrating those sort of moments it was exceptionally difficult to orchestrate those kind of moments, to get all the ducks in a row, to get all the planets aligned so that you can, get your coup de grace or whatever to deal damage to a boss or boss or difficult enemy, what have you. And then, there's also the fact that, like, when you fight bosses, there's a lot of times there's, like, phase changes, right? Like, you've dealt enough damage, and then the phase of the boss fight has now changed. Or there's some sort of cutscene mid-boss fight type of thing. And you've built up stagger, and you're getting ready to deal your massive damage, and then all of a sudden there's this cutscene or this phase change, and the stagger goes away, and and you've lost all the progress you've made and all the coordination and orchestration that you've done to get to this point. It's just kind of frustrating. I thought that like the combat system overall, it has those moments, it has those great moments, and then it has those maybe not so great moments. I think mechanically it also was kind of a little bit clunky. The targeting system, you might be locked onto a target, building up stagger, doing what you need to do, or trying to figure out weaknesses, whatever. And then, another target, a weak, you're focusing on a weak point, and then something else just kind of like darts in front of you, and then all of a sudden you're locked onto that, and then, you lose, a little bit of your flow state as you're fighting. And then also, like, if you don't have things bound to any sort of shortcut, like, you have to literally stop time to select, a weapon ability or a materia that's not bound to a shortcut, which is just, the immersion is immediately broken when you literally stop time to select these things. It's one of the things that, like, I loved the turn-based combat of the original game, and it's one thing that just doesn't translate well to this. It's clear they wanted this like free-flowing combat, and then to just kind of incorporate this weird turn-based kind of, it's not turn-based, but you get what I'm saying, like this weird freeze time system. It just felt a little clunky. I don't know if that's something that's going to be changing in Rebirth. It's something I hope they change, because it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's certainly not the best. I think it's one of the most important systems in the game, and I think it could have taken a little bit more polish to really perfect, because it's close. It's really good. It is pretty good. It's a fun combat system, but those things really just kind of are a pretty big drawback. I think that the place where this game really, really shines is unfortunately kind of a place that was already tread by the original, but it's the story. The story's great, and the original laid it out for the game, so there's not much new here, except for one aspect, which is actually fairly significant, and it was a huge, huge risk by Square Enix to take. And for those of you who haven't played Remake, this is going to be somewhat of a spoiler section. So if you haven't played Remake or the original Final Fantasy, or are planning on playing them and Rebirth, whatever, you may want to stop listening now or skip ahead. But essentially, there's a story element within Final Fantasy VII Remake that, in some way, I'm not sure I entirely understand it, but I believe that Final Fantasy VII Remake exists as a different universe from the one that we played in 1997. So you played Final Fantasy, 7 in 1997 and played through the game, and that story exists on its own. And this game is not a redo or a repeat of that universe, of that playthrough, of that thing. Essentially, the way I interpret it is, there are arbiters of fate called Whispers that you will encounter pretty early in the game. You won't really know who they are until much later, towards the end of Remake, that they are arbiters of fate. But essentially, they're these cloaked figures who appear randomly throughout the story and influence characters, or cause changes to the reality of the game, because they are trying to make the reality or the universe of this game align with the reality of the one that unfolded, in the game that you played in 1997. So I think it's like an alternate universe, or a parallel universe, and these Whispers are arbiters of fate who are trying to not make your playthrough, but make the game, or the story unfold the way it did in 1997. And in some ways, they are also being interfered with, because I think the main big bad, Sephiroth, transcends the original Final Fantasy VII, and a version of him, or maybe it's supposed to be implied that it is that Sephiroth, kind of invades this playthrough and is starting to alter reality and time of that playthrough, in order to try to win in this universe. because obviously he loses in the other one. So I don't know that that is all implied, but it's kind of my interpretation. So things are different in this remake universe as opposed to the one that you played in the original Final Fantasy VII. Certain characters are alive in Final Fantasy VII Remake that are known, obviously, to be dead in Final Fantasy VII. There's a pretty obvious character who I could name, but, for those of you who are, trepidatious about spoilers, I'll do my best to try to keep things vague. But the point is, this game has an aspect to it that's kind of multiverse, or maybe not multiverse, but alternate or parallel realities, which I think is so cool. I really, it was a huge risk for them to take, because I think when people think Final Fantasy VII Remake, they thought kind of like a very true to the game remake, no alterations or whatever. And I think they took a big swing with this, and I personally love it. I think it's such a unique. Well, it's not necessarily unique, but I think it's such a cool, playing with time and universes and stuff. We kind of saw it with Marvel, with the, Endgame and whatever, they go to different universes and realities and get the stones in those realities to make the Infinity Gauntlet or whatever. Stuff like that, like, playing with time and realities and universes, and altering, timelines and stuff like that, like the Loki stuff, like altering timelines. And I think this game does it. I think it's awesome. I think it's really cool. It's poignant. It's on people's minds, with all or at least it was at the time in 2020, right? Like that's around the time all the Marvel stuff wrapped up. And there's a lot of other intellectual property that use those kind of tropes and themes. And I think it really works with Final Fantasy VII. I think it's so cool. If I'm right about Sephiroth kind of like using fate and the unfolding of time and space and stuff like that, if like that is if it's the same Sephiroth, I think that's ingenious. I could totally be wrong. It could just be that it could just be that fate is just somewhat different in this game for other reasons, fate or destiny and unfolding, whatever. My interpretation was that Sephiroth was playing with fate and tampering with it, and that's what was causing all the, all the variations and why the whispers even exist in this universe is because somebody is tampering with time and space. In my interpretation, that is Sephiroth, because he knows he loses in the original Final Fantasy. And then, he gets a second chance here. So if he can, manipulate this cloud and manipulate fate and destiny here, he might be able to succeed in doing what he wanted to do in the original Final Fantasy. But that might be totally wrong. It might just be as simple as they're playing with fate and destiny so that the outcome of this game can be different than the previous one. That it could be as simple as that. And then, what else did I want to touch on? So I'm just looking over my notes here. Place where the game truly shines, story. Oh, yes, I wanted to touch on the voice acting, the voice cast. It was absolutely phenomenal. Like every single character every single actor embodied their character to an incredible degree. The comparison I want to make here, and this is incredible praise for me, because Lord of the Rings is one of the most beloved franchise, intellectual property, whatever you want to call it, to me, period. Like it is one of the things I hold most dear to my heart. Both Peter Jackson's movies and the Lord of the Rings books by J.R.R. Tolkien. And when I was a kid, when I pictured Aragorn, I had an idea of what he looked like. When I pictured Frodo and all the other characters in the book, I had an idea of who they were. And then when I saw Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy, now when I reread them, I can only ever see Aragorn as Viggo Mortensen. I can only ever see Boromir as Sean Bean, Frodo as Elijah Wood, and that's a credit to them because they embodied their characters so well. It's sad, obviously, that I don't have an image of who my quote unquote my Aragorn was, but at the same time, I'm okay with it because Viggo Mortensen and that entire cast did such a good job embodying those characters that I'm okay losing my Aragorn for Viggo's Aragorn, or Peter Jackson's Aragorn, however you want to put it. And in that vein, the characters of Final Fantasy VII Remake, or I should say the voice actors for Final Fantasy VII Remake, did such an exceptional job embodying and becoming those characters: Cloud, Aerith, Tifa, Barrett, Red 13, Wedge, Biggs, Jesse. I can't name a single character who I feel was a standout did a bad job. I think everybody did so well that, like, when I go back and play the Final Fantasy VII, the original Final Fantasy VII, because I inevitably will. I play it probably once every 5 years or so, or more frequently. When I go back to replay Final Fantasy VII, the original, in whatever capacity I can, I will, as I'm reading the text on the screen for Cloud's dialogue, Aerith's dialogue, Tifa's dialogue, I will be reading it and I will be hearing these voice actors' voices, their intonations, their deliveries, as I read it, because I think they embodied the characters so well, and that is a credit to how well that they did. So that's an area of the game that I think was incredible. I think the voice cast did an incredible job. When it comes to dialogue in the game, I mean, overall, true to the original, Cloud's pessimistic, or not pessimistic, but an kind of uncaring douche at the beginning, and then becomes more open and stuff. The dialogue is good for the game. There are areas where I think, not to compare. But something I think The Last of Us did really well is, as you're playing the game, when there is downtime, The Last of Us did a really good job of providing the player with opportunities to be a fly on the wall. You're actively playing the game as Joel or Ellie and, doing things, but, there's obviously slower times. You have to get like a ladder so she can get up to another area and unlock a door so you can get through, type of stuff. And The Last of Us did a really good job of having kind of not latent, but this in-passing dialogue that occurs as you play the game. As you're playing, the characters are talking, and you're getting a better idea of who they are and what they want. This game has that. It has kind of dialogue for characters as you go through and do things. It's just not obviously, The Last of Us is 20 hours soaking wet. Depending on difficulty, but you play that if you're playing just for story, that game is 20 hours soaking wet. This one is probably 30 hours. Well, if on easy, it's probably a lot faster. So when it comes to downtime, it feels like maybe there was just a lot that they needed to cover, so the quality is not going to be as good comparatively between the two games. Whereas The Last of Us is very tight. Very well paced. So in those moments that occur where where this dialogue is occurring, it's purposeful, it's meaningful. That dialogue is for that section of the game. There's some instances I think where it's random, but a lot of times when you're in this area doing this thing, this latent or this idle dialogue occurs. Because you're here. Final Fantasy VII feels more like, you just finished a battle and, and they talk, or, sometimes it feels like it's proximity related, like you've gotten to this area, so, these characters will say this thing, but, I don't know, I overall just kind of wish that some of that in-passing dialogue was a little bit more in-depth, had a little bit more meaning to it. Yeah, just something small there, but so in closing, I know that the majority of this video has been kind of critical of the game, but I don't want you to misunderstand. I love Final Fantasy VII Remake. I truly loved this game. There were just in my most recent playthrough a few areas where I think the game really could have used some improvement. in sections of the game that I think people overlook because they're still either nostalgic or obviously hold the source material in such high regard, and it's so beloved to them. Um, at the end of the day, I don't think an 87 or an 81 is truly where this game stands when it comes to objectively, like, as a video game. I just don't think that that's a fair, evaluation of the value it provides. I think it's a fantastic game. I think it's beautiful. I think the voice cast is amazing. I think there are some really good moments. I think it does a good job of delivering the original story in a new light, add some new story elements and things like that. But there are some things that really hamper the experience of playing this game. It's a beautiful game with a few things that really hamper it down. So it's a diamond that's covered in a little bit of rough, a little bit, just a little bit too much rough, in my opinion, and that's what really brings it down. There's a diamond in there, and you do experience it a lot, but every now and then you'll hit this rough patch, and it really just kind of drags the entire experience down. And for that reason, I don't, I'm not going to drag it through the mud. I'm not going to say it's that much lower, but I think like an 81 is closer to a fair assumption of what it is. I would put it at a 7 out of 10. And if we're going halvesies, I'd say it's a solid 7.5 out of 10. But I'm sticking with 7. I don't think it's an 8. If we're going an out of 10 scale, that's where it lands for me, is a 7. And that's not bad. That's good. That's a good game. I think 7 is good, 8 is great, 9 is fantastic, and 10 is like, you can't beat a 10, obviously. 10 is the best, video game of all time. And this isn't the best video game of all time. It has its issues. It has those pacing issues. It has, a lot of fat added on just to keep you playing. But it also has beautiful moments where you see, Midgar. You get to know these characters in a way you didn't the first time. You hear their voices. You feel, what they feel. There's no interpretation this time. Based on how you're reading the text across the screen, because there is no text. These characters are living, breathing. Midgar is living, breathing. So there's a lot here that's great, and then there's some here that really kind of hampers the overall experience. So I think it's a little overrated, but it is far from a bad game, but it's also far from far from the best game. It's not far from great. It could have used a little bit more polish, and I think it would have been great. But instead, it's just good, which is good. It's good enough. So yeah. My hope is that Rebirth will do a better job of delivering meaningful content. Expanding on characters, places that are really meaningful. Rather than expanding on areas like a train graveyard-esque area. Really kind of show us the great things and expand on the great things, and don't add meat where it's not needed. Don't add flavors and spices and all this extra stuff where it's not needed, required, or necessary. Add it where we want it, not where it's gonna just add time. We're not just adding things on for no reason. I hope it improves on the slightly clunky battle combat system. Just a few tweaks here and there. Some experimentation. I'm sure they'll find a way that it can feel a little bit more fluid. And then the last thing is really just pacing. If they're able to kind of improve or outclass Remake when it comes to the overall pacing of game, some gameplay elements like the monkey bars with Tifa and Chapter 16 and stuff like that, those types of instances, I think that will make Remake or Rebirth far and away, a 10 out of 10. It's those small things that really kind of detract for Remake and drop it to where I ended up, bringing it. But overall, I'm hoping Rebirth does that, even if it doesn't. A 7 out of 10. This game could have been a 5 out of 10, and I'd still be thrilled with it. There could have been, half the game could have been absolute garbage, but if the other half was just, the cutscenes and some of the, the battle experience that we got, I would still love it. So I'm thrilled that we got a 7 out of 10. If Rebirth is the same, it feels the same way. If it's a 7, if it feels like a 7 out of 10 to me, I'll still be thrilled. But from an objective standpoint, they are far from the greatest games of all time, and I don't think Remake can be counted among my top 10 at the very least. And for that reason, I can't give it more than like an 8 out of 10. So it falls more closer to the 7 out of 10 for me. Which might be harsh, and it's probably might be an unpopular opinion, but that is my objective evaluation of the game. So if you guys want more review type gameplay or review type material and content, please feel free to like and subscribe. We're getting close to 400 subscribers, which is absolutely insane to me. If you want more content like this, please like and subscribe, and let me know if you enjoyed it, if you agree with me, if you think maybe I'm being too harsh, or areas where you disagreed with me. I would love to know in the comments. And yeah, thanks everybody for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.